That makes sense. But see, the hard part for us, if not all of the Lutherans, the low church Lutherans don't celebrate the Eucharist like all the time, but the high church does. They look more Roman than we do sometimes. If you go into a really strong, strict or old Orthodox, whatever they call them, high church, high Lutheran church. However, the difficulty is the third one is the continuation of the laying on of hands. Now, some of them still say they do that. The problem is it's hard because they don't have that central authority anymore. They have different synods. No, but significant thing that you got to really pay attention to in terms of succession of orders, which I think is something that's significant. Remember that for us, the validity of the Eucharist, you know what I mean by validity of the Eucharist, that it is truly valid, okay? That's very important to us. So the church is going to be pretty safeguarding that. This is what I have to say. I don't say anything else. I say, take this, all of you, and eat it. This is the bread I have to use, unleavened bread. This is the wine I have to use with a certain % of alcohol. Because we have to maintain as much as possible. And that's the laying on of hands is the continuation of that. That's very important. So you need to know that I was ordained by a valid bishop. Who was being ordained, as a bishop, he was ordained by a valid, with the right then by 3 bishops who know the Holy Father has been appointed and he is validly there to be ordained, and that it was ordained correctly. Because that's the other thing, is that this can be ordained invalidly. And if you're ordained invalidly, then you don't have the apostolic succession to make the Eucharist. Therefore, what's important about this for us, and where the big debate goes, and I am not here to debate this, but to show you or understand the issue around the debate. The issue around the debate of women priests, okay? What happens is that the Eastern Church and the Catholic Church say that if you ordain a woman as a priest, they no longer have, there's something missing because one of the requirements right now, is that's a doctrinal element of the church that is necessary for the celebration of the Eucharist. You know, males celebrate the Eucharist in persona Christi. Others say, I don't think you have to have that. Well, I know you don't think you have to have that, and that's why you do the things you do, but why the church doesn't do the things it is it does believe that if a woman celebrates the Eucharist, it's invalid. Using the same words, because it's not just about the same words, that there's no apostolic succession there. So therefore, that's an invalid Eucharist. Now that would mean but this is where it gets even a little dicier. Church, it's not an issue just of that it would be invalid, because some very clearly say that it's invalid. We don't know if it's valid or not. In other words, we know it's valid. Don't know if it's valid that way 100%. And the church isn't going to take a chance that it might be 50-50 chance that it's valid. Because there is no 50-50 chance for us. It's valid or it's not. And the difficulty we have is that if we were to ordain, let's say married women, the entire Eastern Church would consider all of our sacraments invalid. Okay, because they're like, a woman, that's invalid, you don't have the right matter there. Others would say, that's ridiculous. As long as you can say the words and you can have the meaning, then it can happen, which other religions have. The issue that the thing that we have is that, okay, so let's say a renegade bishop ordains a priest, a woman priest. She is not validly celebrating the Eucharist. However, he's a valid bishop, right? So he's celebrating the Eucharist. She celebrates the Mass. You all receive communion. You think it's the Eucharist, right? But all that. Then she becomes a bishop. She starts ordaining priests. Those priests are all invalid now, right? So then the problem is that then let's say you validate a woman ordains a priest, a man. That man becomes bishop. He starts ordaining everybody. It's not valid because he's not a validly ordained priest. You see, in order to do that. So the reason why I bring this complexity up is because there was some discussion I had heard in the studies that the Episcopalian Church was going to kind of reunite with the Catholic Church. You know, because they still had orders, they still had bishops, they still had bishops already trained, like the Orthodox Church. Because the difference between the Orthodox, a lot of difference between the Orthodox and the Catholic Church is really the authority, the judicial side, like who has authority in the church, not the valid sacraments. You see the distinction I'm making? Very theological. People don't always appreciate this. Okay. The Episcopalian Church started ordaining women bishops. Then we don't know anymore. We don't know what's going on anymore. Because we don't know. It could be true. Some people believe it is. Some people believe it isn't. One of the things the church says, regardless of what you believe, the church desired to remain firm in what it knows to be true. It can't that it could possibly be true. That's why people who say equal, they're not. Married priest is a discipline in the church. The Holy Spirit does it. If church changes it, priests can get married. It's a discipline the church is holding on to. Is the fact that you need has always been since the beginning of time as Christ chose, a male, bread, the words of institution. That makes that Eucharist happen. All right? Someone, that's why I remember when I was probably Matthew's age, I remember because a priest came to visit. We were talking about something. He just came to when he did the parish visitations, right? And I don't know how we got on the topic, but the priest was telling me how a woman said to him, like, if I were on an island myself, and I had bread and wine, and I had to miss a lot, I believe it would be the Eucharist. And he says, well, you can believe what you want, but it's not. Right? And I was like, it's really definitive. You know, he really clear about what he believed, you know, and I was like, so you could see that in our discussions among lay people, they have no appreciation of the validity of the Eucharist or not. Like, if I were to ask you, is the Eucharist valid or not? How do you know your Eucharist? How do you know when you go to Mass that you are truly receiving the body and blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ? How can you be sure? The only way you can be sure is that I'm there. And I've been taught, and I follow it. And if I don't follow it, the church will come in and say, you're out. We're going to put someone in there who knows how to celebrate the Eucharist. Because it safeguards the people that you will always have that connection. Now, that's important to us. It is not at all important to a good majority of Protestant churches. So you can see really in how we understand the church, the validity of the Eucharist, and guarantees that you receive the sacraments not based on my preference and that's why one of the things is, and I think it says a little later we'll do this, there's no such thing as a renegade priest who wants to set up his own, by the way, right? Because they have one, I was watching one video on YouTube, Texas, a guy set up sort of apostolic Catholic church, right? And people are going there because they say, it's the same thing. And I'm like, no, it's not. Because what you're missing there is the communion with Catholics. This person has separated. It looks the same, it smells the same, but interiorly it's not the same because it doesn't have the communion. When you go to a Catholic Mass, that Mass is in communion with the entire world and all time. Right? And that's my job to make sure you always get that. That's why with some of these priests who are doing kooky things, you know, and all kinds of crazy things that cause all kinds of problems, you know, because what they're doing is, well, they say, well, I believe this. As a matter of fact, I think it's too bad Jen wasn't here. She texted me something. She was upset because of what she went to a mass, and the priest said, well, this is what I believe. And I always tell people when they say, well, when they ask me a question, and I say, well, Father, what do you believe? I'm like, what do you care what I believe? Do you want my faith, or do you want the church's faith? My job is the church's faith to tell you. If I believe or disbelieve any of that, I got to keep that stuff to myself, right? If I want to, because that's not my job to tell you my belief, and you shouldn't care what I believe. You should care that you get the apostolic teachings, that is in communion with the entire world. And that's why it's hard, both left and right, because we've got some crazy right people as well as some crazy left people who are doing all kinds of things. And I'm like, nah, that's not where I am. I'm staying in communion. Whether they like Pope Francis or not, whether they think he's anti-Pope and all that stuff that's all over the internet, and they're all right people that are saying that. I'm like, you are ridiculous. Ridiculous. You stay in communion. You'll always be in communion. Now, the church, we already went through, the church isn't perfect. We're filled with sinners. But you're guaranteed in communion that you'll always have the apostolic faith, that was handed on by the apostles in communion with the whole church in the world, right? And that you're getting the teachings of the apostles, as well as the church continues to teach that through apostolic succession. Because we have some bishops who then left, they leave and they ordain other bishops, and they find other bishops. They know enough that they need that for validity, right? But then they lack the communion part of it. But anyway, and they start a schism. So that's why we always say that the bishops are the successors of the apostles, right? With a college of bishops, we talk about them, and that the whole apostolic element through always in communion with Peter, as all the apostles were always in communion with Peter, that she remains in communion with faith in her origins. That's the church's origins. So, Christ is the source of all of this, we believe. All right? So I wanted to make sure we got that apostolic succession down and the apostolic mission. Okay. This is the one thing about, I think the reason why, oh, you know what? Oh my gosh, I have some more slides I forgot. This is one of the reasons why, too, is that it's 875. Well, I'm already down to the faithful. I forgot. All right. But you know what, though? Where is my, yeah, look at that. I did. Isn't that funny? I must have gone back. See, the threefold office of the bishop, but anyway. Christ faithful. Oh, that's right. Okay, I know now. 875 is where we are now. Because what happens is we're talking about the Christ faithful. We're going to talk about the hierarchy first, which is the continuation of the apostolic. At 875, this is very important, that there is no one person can proclaim the gospel to himself. It has to be proclaimed. No one person gives himself a mandate and a mission to proclaim the gospel. No one can bestow grace upon himself, right? There must be a minister of grace. And from Christ, bishops and priests receive the mission of the faculty to act in persona Christi, which means in the person of Christ, right? You are all what we call alter Christus by virtue of your baptism, which means other Christs. The priest in the ministerial priesthood is when they celebrate the Mass, because when I'm a regular guy on the street doing the things, I'm a baptized person, right? So I'm supposed to be other Christ in the world. However, when I celebrate the sacraments, I am in the person of Christ. It is Christ himself who celebrates them through me. All right, so this is what's called in this section the ecclesial ministry, the hierarchical section of the church. That even though we have the lay faithful, the catechism starts, this is the ministry of the church, the people who are called into the church ministry. All right? But what's for sure is that if someone says, I feel called to priesthood, and the church says, we don't think you are, how dare you tell me? I'm like, yeah, after discernment, we don't think that you're called to priesthood. And that has a lot of hurt feelings, as you can tell. And then if some people say, well, you know what? I have a mandate to proclaim the gospel, even though so that's why I'm going to start my own church or something. And one of the important things is I can't bless myself. We were talking about that with Sister Pat. One time I said, we were going over a bridge, and she is always afraid of bridges and all that, Sister Pat. So she was like, I was like, look, if it's going to go down, it's our time, right? And then he said something like, you can give me absolution and give yourself absolution. I said, I can't give myself absolution. I can't do that. I have to receive that from the church. Otherwise, it'd be great to go to confession to myself, right? That would be really cool. But I can't, because I can't bestow that upon myself. It comes from the church, and I have to find another priest to give it to a priest, right? Right? And that's why we believe we receive the faculties from the church, who is Christ, to do this. When I get ordained, I get a letter, you now have the faculties. I am here serving at the light of the bishop. He has the right to take me right out of here. I am his representative here. That's why those people who have big, fights against the bishop in the name of righteousness, it's a hard thing to understand, because I have no authority here unless the bishop gives it to me. And he could take it away from me at any time. And then I can have a sit-in, right? And then make the papers and cause a division in the church. But for whatever reason, and then we have those people, what was his name? Remember Karapi? Karapi was so popular, in EWTN, Father Karapi, right? And then the community, the South community, called him back, and he's like, the other one was the pro-life priest there, Frank Pavone. Pavone, yeah, he was like, look at the community calling back. He's like, I'm not going back. What do you mean you're not going back? You don't serve there as a priest, unless some bishop gives you the permission. You no longer have that permission. And so what he did is he, which is odd to me, but maybe one day I can understand it, is that he feels so called by God that he took laicization. And now you see him on the website, he doesn't have his collar on. And I don't understand that, because I'm like, look, the bishop says, you're done here, I want you here. That's fine with me, right? Because I serve at the pleasure of the bishop. And when he decides I'm done, I'm done. And then he'll put someone else here. Because I don't receive my mission, I don't decide myself what my mission will be. It's given to me by the church. And that's what they talk about in terms of we become slaves to Christ. That's 876, right? We become slaves to Christ in ecclesial ministry, and that is marked by service. And we are not ministers on our own, but the grace is given to us by Christ for others. Therefore, in everyone must be freely become a slave for all. And that's the idea. And I think for some people it becomes like a job, and I realize that it's very important that for the people that what you get is what the church has, not what some individual priest you like or follow believes. I think that's really important. Right? That's why I got to get you guys into the catechism. So if I say something wrong, you can fix it. Tell me, so I'll know. A guy asked me, I went to the station with him 2 weeks ago. He said, is there anything that the church believes that you personally don't believe? Asking me. Just anything? Like, can we talk about anything that maybe you might have a struggle with? I'm not telling you, by the way. But I would not tell you, because now you would forever know. All right? It's better that you say he teaches the faith. Right? All right. The other thing is 877, and for us, this is very important. Ecclesial ministry has a collegial character and a fraternal unity. It really is very important that it doesn't matter if you go to Mass here, or you go to Mass in Auburn, or you see the priest in Louis and Augusta, that you're going to get the Catholic Church. And it's because we are in communion. There might be differences, because there's a lot of variation you can have. It doesn't matter. I mean, for me, I'm a big fan of options. If the church gives you the option, I will allow you to exercise it. Some priests are a little more on that, but I'm like, look, you want to go to confession face to face or behind the screen? I don't care. You choose. You have the freedom to choose when you want. You want to kneel for communion? The church says you can. You want to stand to me? The church says you can. You want to receive in the hand? Fine. You want to receive in the tongue? Fine. I have my own personal preferences, but I can't inflict them on you. You are free. The church gives you that freedom. I should not take it away from you. However, any priest who does take it away from you, say, I have a right to do this. You don't have a right to stop me. And some really, I think anyway, some do. So there's the College of Bishops. This is the Vatican II, as you remember this picture, where there's this collegial nature. But just because there's also a collegial nature, character to this, there's also a personal aspect of ministry, right? So because we relate to people, even though we're all together, I mean, you relate to me. I have a history. I was born in Biddeford, right? In a Catholic family. That affects so there's a personal side to this as well. And I'm an accountant, so that throws it into a whole nother, because if I were in theater and chorus, you'd get a very different priest, right? But I'm an accountant, so I make sure your bills are paid. So anyway, and it's all done in the name of Christ. So the Episcopal College, the head is always the Pope, obviously, and we believe that he's always in communion. Everybody stays in communion with the Pope, all right? And the threefold nature of the teaching office, and I'm going to skip right down because it's already 7, go from 84 all the way down to 894. So there's like 10 of them. By the way, I want to the only reason why I did this is because these are provinces in the Catholic Church. So every parish has a territory. Every diocese has the accumulation of all those of that territory. But then there's a province that connects a bunch of dioceses. We're in the New England province of Boston is the archdiocese. That's why we call that the archdiocese, which means every archdiocese has dioceses under it. All right? And that's just the way the structure of this. How do you communicate? Well, the Pope communicated to the Archbishop, kept connected, stayed in communion with all of the dioceses, with all the priests. The priest stayed in communion with all the people. So you could see that, Pope himself has universal authority over all. He can come in here and say, I don't want Father Greenleaf in this parish. And I have moved, because the one thing the Pope has is what's called universal jurisdiction. He's the only one, and by virtue of his responsibility to keep everybody in communion. That's his role. That's his one role, one significant role, besides the vicar for Christ, Peter, representative of successor of Peter, sits in that seat in Rome. His responsibility is to keep in communion. So that's all this stuff going on now. Communication of Vigano, because Vigano operating himself, getting out of communion, and so they declared. A lot of people use this phrase, but it's not true. Vatican excommunicated him? Okay, that's not true. You excommunicate yourself. The Vatican claims that truth. Because it will always want to have you to come back, but the statements you have now take you out of communion with the church. So we excommunicate ourselves by being no longer in communion, and by him saying the things to about the Holy Father or communion or his teaching, he now is no longer in union with the Holy Father. They call him anti-pope. You can't do that. Then you're not in communion with an anti-pope, right? So he's saying you have now excommunicated yourself. So that's a decision he makes, that the church declares this to be true. Because of your actions, you have done this. All right? So the threefold office of the bishop, which is going right through there, is the teaching office, the sanctifying office, and the governing office. And I think those are pretty clear. Right? The magisterial teachings office. The Pope enjoys kind of that, what we call the infallibility of the church. Right? And the bishops are, first we say, the reason why the Pope is infallible, by the way, is seen in a large context that the church is infallible, the sense of the people. Right? God would not deceive us. Right? God would not allow us to be in error, that kind of thing, on purpose. So the idea of the infallibility of the church, because of the keys to Peter and the giving of the Holy Spirit, that the continuation of this can, right? But the infallibility of the church, hope is seen in connection to that, and you see that because it starts with, the magisterial task in this 890. Magisterial task is to preserve God's people from deviation, right, and defection, and to guarantee them the possibility of professing the true faith without error. That's what the church's role is that it's giving you the true faith. How can it do that? How can it claim to be such? Christ endowed the church shepherds with a charism of infallibility. The Pope enjoys this most specifically with the keys of the kingdom, right? So he's whatever in particular. But remember that he's not infallible on everything he does. We're only talking about phases of faith and morals when a question comes to the surface. When a question surfaces, what do we believe? What have the apostles believed? And usually the Holy Father then, with the idea would be that he would get the sense of the people. And then he would get the sense of the history and the teachings and the connection with the apostles, and then declare this as such. That is what Peter did when Paul wanted to know if the Gentiles needed to be circumcised in order to be Christian. Did you have to become Jewish first in order to become Christian? Because we have all Gentiles in the church. What are we going to do with them? We're going to make them all Jews and then they're going to make them Christian? And he said, so he presented, and that was the big fight because there were the Judaizers who were saying yes, and then there were sort of the Paul's branch that was saying no. And then Paul to Peter, you've got to decide. Do we not need this? Because he's arguing no. And then after consultation with the brothers, and it goes on and says in the Drew, you don't. This is what's necessary for the faith, taking care of the poor, all that stuff. So what you have is that it's not like he's ruling everything infallible. Matter of fact, he's only used the infallible statement once, and it was on the assumption. They usually say 1.5 because the Immaculate Conception was kind of the debate was, but yet that fallibility of the Pope had not been announced yet. That was before Vatican I, which is where it was finally declared. So anyway, there's a lot of junk. You're all looking like, what is he talking about? Because we have huge classes on this. All right, so the class is called ecclesiology. So we study this in detail, but to let you know that those are the topics that we're fighting over. It's like, okay, what is infallibility? He has to declare. I declare after, if you read the infallible statement of the Assumption, after consulting with the people of faith and the bishops around the world, is what the Catholic Church has always believed. And he declares it as such. That kind of thing. No. But this is where, even though you have to look at 892. 892. So 891 is talking about the Pope's infallibility. 892, there is also the teachings that without being infallibly defined in a definitive manner, proposed in the ordinary magisterium of a teaching, right? So the teaching of the faith, are to adhere with religious assent, which is a difference. So the church makes a difference between religious assent and assent of faith. So assent of faith, Jesus Christ is true God, true man. Religious assent, would be things that are not considered infallible or forever true, but you would problem like, let's say, a discipline, like not eating meat on Fridays, or I'd say something like where for myself, ordination, married priesthood or celibate priesthood, right? So he is declared as such. So you have what's called religious assent, which is different, but it's related to the assent of faith. These are not unnecessarily. So the church is making a distinction between those statements that are infallible, come from ecumenical councils. Like, you cannot say that there are only two persons. I know you can't say this, but two persons in the Trinity. I mean, because of Trinity, because that's what the word Trinity, right? Three. But you have to say, when you're talking about the Godhead, that there are only two persons in the Godhead. You can't. That's wrong. That is an infallible statement. Times, okay? But then some people say, well, what about contraception? Right? Is that an infallible statement? And I was like, well, it wasn't defined as infallible. However, strongly taught. Therefore, one should give religious assent to it. Not assent to faith, like, Jesus Christ is true God and true man, like you should die for. Right? Someone said, how many of you believe it? If you believe Jesus Christ is true God and true man, raise your hand and I'll shoot you. See how many of you raise your hand, okay? Because I believe, versus someone who says, if any of you believe in, contraception is a sin, raise your hand and I'll shoot you. Well, that's probably not the same level of faith, right? Because there are some things that we would die over, and there are some things that we give a religious assent to. Some people don't believe it, some people do, whatever it is, situations, debate goes on and on and on and on. But the point of this is you give religious assent means I do agree to it. I do. I believe it. But the church wants you to make a very different connection. There are some people that it's like, it's all the same. Jesus is God, and meet on Fridays, same teaching. To break one is to break the other. To not believe one is not to believe the other. Okay, I think we got to have a little more sophisticated faith in that, right? However, we do have people who do that, okay, who have that. And it's like, okay, now wait a second. Some can be dispensed of. Not going to Mass on Sundays is a sin. It is a grave sin to not go to Mass on Sunday. Therefore, you should not go to communion until you receive communion, go to confession, if you don't go to Mass on Sunday, except for valid reason. That's the teaching of the church. It's never changed. People don't do it. I give lots of communion at Christmas to people who don't come to Mass every week for reasons other than valid reasons, right? But the church hasn't changed that teaching. And then, I still give religious assent to that. And we should all do that. In other words, it's not something you can just dismiss. That's what it's trying to say, because it's related to the assent of faith. Does that kind of make sense? Or is that really confusing because I brought something up really controversial? Okay, good. Makes sense to her, and that's all I need. Because I really want to get to the laity. No, I'm serious. I don't mean that facetiously. I really do. I mean, I want to get to the laity because you know what? We're going to talk about the church and the priests and all that stuff. But now let's talk about you guys and your role. And this is my statement. I've been saying it since 1980-something. No, I became a priest, 1995. Okay, so priesthood. We're not all living it the right way. Some of you hate priests. Some of the priests in your family, have come through here. Some of you, think these priests need to get better at what they do, and it's a shame that these priests are their vocation. But I'm going to tell you, and with the shortage of priests, because there's a shortage, and I'm going to tell you there is a greater shortage of lay people living up to their vocation than priests living up to theirs, in my opinion. And so there's not only a shortage of lay people, but if you wanted to compare abuses, or not necessarily abuse, or let's say the less than moral life of the church in the two categories of priests versus lay people, I think you guys win higher percentages of affairs and not living faith or baptismal calling, and then Not you. Oh no, you don't. I'm just kidding. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about the role of the laity, because I'm like, it's easy to point the finger at the priest. And look, I'm not saying we're saints, because we are not. We are definitely not, right? But we come from you guys, right? Yay, we're right. That's what I say. I mean, take a look. We're in the same crowd, right? So the vocation of the laity, it belongs to the laity. All right, it belongs to the laity by engaging in temporal affairs. This is 898. Directing all of it to God's will. Temporal affairs, ecclesial affairs. Temporal affairs are the finances, the goods of the church, the goods of the world, the stock market, all that, the things of the world. The worldly things are temporal affairs, because temporal means they're gonna pass away, right? So your job is that. That's your vocation, it says. All right? You are to direct all of this to God's will. All the temporal affairs to God's will. So we should look like the kingdom of God here. If all the laity live their vocation to the laity, we would have like the kingdom of God here. No, not because God give you the grace, but you would turn away from it, right? In a special way to order all the temporal affairs so that they are closely related to it. So I had a person that said, I'm a married man, and he's a psychiatrist, and I said, he's like, I want to give my life to the church. I want to be like a deacon. I want to give my life to the church. I said, you are the church. If you want to give your life to the church, hang a shingle up that says you are a Catholic psychiatrist. And anybody who needs help as a Catholic, you come and see me. He said, well, if I do that, then I won't get business. And I'm like, well, look, that's I said, whatever you're doing, you are doing as a Catholic in the world. So the church is, as a matter of fact, it says that the lay people get to be in the place where only by their presence their church is present. Because I can't get there, right? I can't get there. So I can't run for office. But every Catholic who's running for office should be living their faith, right? We know where that is. We're all the way up to the top. But this idea is that role as a Catholic in the temporal world, all things to God's will. Right? That's the rule. All things to God's will. So, that's why that in all temporal affairs, I'm in charge of the ecclesial affairs. So I'm in charge. So I'm supposed to make sure that you get a valid Eucharist, that you get fed by the graces, you get all the blessings that you need. That's why they say, well, the church, the priest should go, to the, to run for office. And the Pope John Paul II took one of the guys out. He said, you either run for office or you get out of the priesthood, but you're not going to do both, because that belongs to the world. That belongs to the temporal, the laity to do that. You are supposed to make sure they receive all the sacraments they need, that they get all the graces they need, that they get taught the faith that they need to get taught. But you're not supposed to do their work. That's a temporal work. But so there was this like Catholic worker movement where the priests would go out and kind of work in the world and kind of see this sort of part-time, but the church doesn't see it that way. It sees it that I am supposed to be reserved to take care of the sanctuary, let's say. And you're supposed to take care of the world, right? And that's why I think one of the things I try to do is like kick people out of the sanctuary, because everybody's like, oh, we want to get there. I'm like, get out of the sanctuary and get into the world, because that's where the gospel needs to be proclaimed. And I can't get out to the world, because as soon as I walk out as a member of the church, official, I get all these barriers. But you can be a real witness that I can't be. And you can say things to people that I can't say, because I can't get there. Nor should I be at the bar, be out at those places. Well, it's so cool. Yeah, that's not really what. If anything, you should be ready when you need. That, and the church believes in the diversity of that kind of work. But of course, we in the United States, everybody should be doing the same thing. That is not the church. We are a body of Christ. I'm the elbow, you're the knee, you're the toe. We're all different. And as St. Paul says, if everybody was eye, how could the body taste? Or if everybody, so that's why if everybody was laity, how could we really get for the sacraments in that? So what I really like is I put this right here. All right. Lay believers, oh, by the way, if you're looking on it, it's 8. Lay believers are in the front line of the church life. You guys are out there. You guys are on the front. You are the army out there. All right. Outline. For the church is the animating principle of human society. Therefore, they are particularly ought to have an ever clearer consciousness, not only of belonging to the church, but being the church. That is to say, the community of the faithful on earth, under the leadership of the Pope and the common head, and the bishops, and communion with him. They are the church. But this is my problem. I'm going to be really crude, right? You guys don't know anything. That's the problem. Because you get out there and you don't know what to do. You don't know what to say. You don't know how to help. You don't know how to be the church out there. Because we have done such a terrible job dumbing everything down. You guys don't take the time to study it. And then so you go out the world, you say the wrong things. I remember I was in the classroom and when I was at St. Dom's and one of the teachers was teaching that those who kill themselves go to hell. I'm like, they don't go to heaven. I'm like, why are you teaching that? Where did you learn that? The catechism is very clear. Read this in the catechism. How come you're teaching something that's like that? Well, that's what my grandmother taught me. I'm like, geez. The 7-year-old faith, because they stop taking, and especially when they start quoting. I'm going to get out on my little soapbox here. Especially when they start quoting the faith, then they're like, so when was the last time you took a class on the faith? Well, I made my first communion. I'm like, really? So this is when you were 7 years old? Name one other thing that you're teaching now that you only learned, that you stopped learning on the 7th grade. In the second grade, when you're 7 years old. But that's really where so many people are, and it's not for the lack of resources, because Catholics have had this catechism here since 1983, 1994, 1994, 93, 94. Anyway, 92. Anyway, since the 90s. So it's been out for 20-something years, and they're like, I didn't know we had a catechism. Really? How could you do this? Right? How can you be the church? How can you tell people? And what I think is what's happening is that's why the Mormons are coming in, they're knocking on the door, and Catholics are like, oh, I don't know, well, that sounds good to me. All right? I think you're right. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second here. We have like 2,000 years of teaching about what they're talking about. We have an answer for that, or if and especially when you're watching, I like to watch some of the atheists on YouTube because trust me, there's no new heresy under the sun. They've been around forever. That's just a recapitulation of something we've already addressed. We've already talked about this many, many times. The church sees it in a very different way. So, that's why I think that's why you got to get out there, and when someone says something to you, like, my baby died, and you say, well, God needed another angel, it'll smack you up the side of the head, right? Because they're not angels, they're human beings. They're going to heaven, of course. There's no question about that. But they don't turn into something else, right? They don't turn into another creation. They're going to be human beings in heaven. And they're going to be fullness of human beings in heaven, right? But anyway, so another one I have is, I did this out of line. No, I guess I didn't. Oh, no, I guess I'm reading it fast. Okay, so I just want to give a 900, the laity have the right and duty individually to group in associations, right? So you have the right to join associations that help in the promoting of that. This is the, when you are baptized as laity, you share in the prophetic, kingly, and priestly ministry of Christ by virtue of your baptism. This is a quote that comes from Lumen Gentium. And it says, it's about the laity, Lumen Gentium. For all the works, prayers, and apostolic, by the way, there meaning laity. For all the laity's works, prayer, undertaking, family and relaxation of mind and body, if they are accomplished in the Spirit, indeed even the hardships of life, if patiently borne, all these become spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. In the celebration of the Eucharist, these may most fittingly be offered to the Father along with the body of the Lord. And so, worshiping everywhere by their holy actions, the laity consecrate the world itself to God, everywhere offering worship by the holiness of their lives. So that's the job you have to do, is you have to consecrate. And that's, by the way, 901. They quoted that on 901. And I think that is, and what I like is 902, it says that's especially true for parents. All right? And 903 is, you may be admitted into the ministries of the acolyte and reader in the church as lay ministries. That's why you read and serve, right? Because that's the part that you have to play, but that is not primarily yours. That's why they don't understand that it's the priest's role to give out communion, and then when you have all these Eucharistic ministers, and then another priest shows up and they say, can one of you back off? They're like, hey, I came to Mass just to do this. How come he stands in front? It's because he's an ordinary minister, you're an extraordinary minister. The ordinary minister, that's his job, it's his responsibility to give out communion, right? But the only reason why we have lay people giving out communion is not by virtue of your baptism. You give out communion because we need your help, all right? And that if there were 7 priests, you wouldn't be giving out communion, because the idea is it's symbolic, and you'll learn about it later. Communion comes as a gift to you, but we need help, and by virtue you share, the church gives you that, all right? So you share in the kingly office, and then you also share in the prophetic office. There you go. I want to take this one here. This is I like this life. I like this line, because I'm going to skip down now. Because everybody says, I witness in the world by the way I live my life, right? So I'm a good person, and that's how I witness. I don't say anything. They can tell by the way I live, right? They say, preach often and sometimes use words. Well, many people say preach often and never say a word, right? This is what most people do. But this is the quote that comes from the Catechism. This witness of life, however, is not the sole element of the apostolate that the lay people have. The true apostolate is on the lookout for occasions to announce Christ by word, either to unbelievers or to the faithful. So you're always on the lookout. 905. Always on the lookout. Always on the lookout where you can tell people about Christ. Without shame and embarrassment.
So we were told, a long time ago, that one way to bring Christ into the world is so easy is when you go out to a restaurant.
You bless. She says when you go out, the way you do is when you go out to a restaurant, you make the sign of the cross and you say grace. It's an action, yeah. Yeah.
You'd be surprised at how many people, I'm with my grandchildren, people in the restaurant,
Yeah, no, I think it's beautiful. I think, that people make that commitment, and it's hard to do it if you haven't done it. It's hard to be public with our faith, because we were taught that it's a very private thing. I really love, the yakama that the Jewish people wear when they wear it, and not because I want to wear one, because even though I have a place where it fit. What I like about it is, you're wearing it. You got guts, because you're telling everybody that you're a Jew, right? Regardless, and you know where it is, and it's like, yeah, this is my faith. I'm going to wear it, and wearing a cross. And if I become a third order Franciscan, then I wear a cross, and because my crosses are always underneath, but I never wear a cross on the outside. But I see women get to do that, would do that, but guys don't do that, except certain ones. And I'm like, okay, are you a freak or not? You know, right? Because you get to wear your cross. You know, I don't know if I'd wear I wear a cross right here, you know, unless I was Mr. T. Right? Here, big cross, Mr. T. So, but I think, you know, those are all things we all have to deal with, but the idea is to proclaim your faith to the world, you know, and it's not bragging. Trust me, you're not gonna. It's not like everyone's thinking, "Wow, she's really, you know, he's really great." It's like look at that Catholic, you know. So anyway, so that was 905, right? And 907 is the other one I want to point out to you. Is it? Yeah, 907. I like that. I didn't bring it up, but I put the two people talking to each other, because 907 is, in accord with the knowledge, competence, and preeminence which they possess, lay people have the right and even the duty to manifest to the sacred pastors their opinions and matters which pertain to the good of the church. So you have the right to address with me your thoughts about for the good of the church. And you have a duty to do that. You have a duty to correct a priest if he's doing something wrong. And they have a right to make their opinions known, you know, to other Christian faithful. You have a right to talk about your faith. And with due regard to the integrity of faith and morals and reverence toward the pastor. So, I mean, don't be a pain about it. Do it with respect. I know I have an issue with this, and I need to speak to you about this. For the common good and the dignity of persons. So I get them all the time. As a matter of fact, you know, I got one about some of the messages on the side of the van that we have for those who did a voting. Have you all did a voting in the van? All right. You know, and I'm like, great, because I had thought of some of these things. As a matter of fact, the only reason why I'm doing a voting is because I got it. Someone expressed an opinion, and I thought, that's good. You got to listen to everybody. You know, and it allows you to kind of take things into consideration. So, all right. Then after this, the catechism goes on and talks about the kingly office, and you know, you share in the kingly office to take care of the kingdom, right? Lay cooperates and pastors and you can read that because you have to take care of these institutions. You're part of caring for people. I always think of the kingly person, a king. This is my always easy way I used to memorize it. The king takes care of the kingdom. You share in Christ's work to take care of the church. That's why we go to Cross the Street Ministry, because it's our goal to take care of the church, take care of those who are hurting, those who are needy, those who are crying. That's our role, and to share in Christ's work of caring for the kingdom and the building up of this, and having a nice, healthy kingdom, you know, of God in our midst. That we care for one another. We got a lot more work to do because we've got to take care of widows. We've got to take care of grieving, but I can only do so much at once because nothing's there right now with that. But that's what I want to happen. The other thing is that the next part is talking about consecrated life. And the more important about this is a phrase that people are not familiar with, is the evangelical counsels. Now, the evangelical counsels of faith, hope, and charity. They are chastity, poverty, and obedience. Now, these things of chastity, poverty, and obedience are taken by religious, because they're also part of the church, right? Religious are part of the church. So you can tell them now at 9:14, the consecrated life. These are nuns, monks, priests who live in that community, you know. So the evangelical counsels of poverty, chastity, and obedience in 9:14, while not entering into the hierarchical structure of the church. So they don't go in, you know, they're not in the hierarchy. They're nuns and priests and monks. They're not part of the hierarchy. They're the laity. But they take vows. Okay? Now, chastity, poverty, and obedience. This is kind of gives you to embrace religious life for those who are in religious life in some way, and those who are closer. These should be lived by everybody. Every Catholic, every every Christian, every baptized person should live the evangelical counsels of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Now, chastity, I didn't say celibacy, right? I said chastity. Because chastity, a married person lives chastity how? By being faithful to their spouse only, right? It's unchaste to go have sex with all kinds of other people. You have sex within the context of marriage, right? That's how you live a chaste life, all right? So the idea of poverty, chastity, so nothing good the goods. Right, my point now. These people, those religious, like the sisters we have, they're not in the hierarchy of the church. Even though lay people think they are, they're not. Canonically, they're not. So oftentimes they're like, well, if I can't get a priest for communion and I want a priest, if I can't get a priest, I'll go to a nun because she's. So I was like, well, nun is a lay person, right? But we think they're higher than I am, but not in the structure. They're in the same thing, and that's what they tell you. Now the evangelical counsels, all persons. This is 9:15. All persons are to live the evangelical counsels. Those in profession, though, live in a permanent state of life recognized by the church, and they're consecrated to God. So this idea they live consecrated life, that's what they mean. They take these vows and they become a permanent vow that they take. You take them by virtue of your life. You should live that way, right? But they take them as a permanent state that they live in a community. Usually not all of them, but all right. And this is what a phrase I remember. What everybody is called to, God calls certain people to live them more intensely as a reminder for the rest of us. All right. So their presence in our midst should remind us not how bad we are and how holy they are, but they remind us of when you see a nun or a monk or a hermit, right, in the church, what do you see? What does it remind you of in the life of a Catholic? So you should pray. Everybody should pray. So they're called to special prayer, right? There's two in particular. Liturgy of the Hours is prayer, yeah? No, how about if I'll tell you so you don't guess because it's past time, is that their single-minded devotedness, right? Because we are all called to have that single-minded devotedness. Now, in our proper state of life. So when you see someone like that and you say, you should say something like, she's really holy, I should be holy, right? Or that person doesn't own anything, is not attached to anything of this world. I'm called to be detached from the things of this world. See, do you see how what happens? Everybody feels, because we live in a world where guilt was not the Catholic Church who gave guilt. It's been around for a lot longer than that, right? But the idea is that people feel judged by someone, like, I'm not a good person because I'm like, stop that. If anything, you should hear a call for holiness, call for something greater. So one of the other things that they talk about, their witnesses, is the temporality of life in this world, because they stand there in our midst to remind us that in heaven there is no marriage. See, they already live in the state of eternity, so to speak, like what we will be. I know people hate that because they have loved their husband or wife way much, but you guys will be good friends, all right? Be good friends, because we'll all be good friends, because we'll love each other the same, right? Everybody will love each other. So anyway, she doesn't like that one. I had a fight with a guy because it was like, you're gonna see your wife. If she's in heaven and you go to heaven, you'll see your wife. You won't be married. Did you notice that your vows said until death do you part? Your vows actually did not say in eternity, right? You say for the days of your life. Once your life is over, the covenant is over, right? And that's why you can enter into another covenant. You can be married twice, right? Without getting an annulment, because your bond is over. right? Marriage is for this life, but because your first love will be God, right? Your first love in eternity will be God. And they remind us of that. This is the phrase we call it, eschatological. The eschatological means the end time. At the end of time, we will all be, brothers and sisters. We'll all be in religious life because that's what eternity will be. And they live it now in a very broken way because we're human beings. All right? That's when you see the words, when you take a look at things, you'll see things like the eschatological, and it's actually at the end, or the end of time. The one thing I want to give you is the sort of very, very, very different religious life there is in Catholic Church. A lot of people think of nuns and monks, nuns and priests, that's it. We have the eremitic life. Those are the hermits. Those are the people the desert fathers, the eremitic life, they live alone. And you read the catechism, it'll explain to you the purpose of their life. Just because they live alone does not mean that they are selfish and self-centered and they just care for themselves. Because their goal as living alone, true hermits in 920 and 921, right, devote their life to praising God and the salvation of the world. They're supposed to pray for the world. That's why even someone like Saint Therese of Lisieux, she never left the convent, but she was the patron saint of missionaries because she prayed for missionaries in the world, right? Because that's why she's the patron saint of missionaries. But she never left the convent. She didn't have a mission. Never went to the missions. Okay, so that's why, and you can see that the salvation of the world, and then a stricter separation from the world in silence and solitude, prayer, and they do penance for the rest of us, for the church. So they fast and they do penance for the rest of us. That's their calling. May not have a calling for that. Then it goes on to consecrated virgins and widows. We do have consecrated virgins in the church. So if any of you are still virgins, you can consecrate yourself to the Lord, but you have to do it with a bishop, and there's a formation program, and you'll connect with other consecrated virgins around the world. I had a teacher in my philosophy class. She was from Belgium. She was a consecrated virgin, and it was pretty amazing. But she gave her life to the Lord. She never got married, and she devoted to teaching Catholic philosophy, which was really great. She was one of my best teachers. Anyway, and then there are those who are widows, and we're starting some sort of widows thing as well, but that's not as solid as the women who are consecrated virgins. They live in their homes. They don't, go into community, but they connect with a community that's larger than themselves. The other one is religious life. We all know that. We're probably familiar with that. That's 825, 826, 827. But then the secular institutes is one I think you can see it over there. That's one that we're not often familiar with. These are people who are consecrated. They live in their homes and they live in the world. You don't know them because they don't wear habits, right? And you can see the secular institute. It's a form of, this is 928. It's a form of consecrated life for those who live in the world and strive for sanctifying the world from within the world. In other words, they don't go to a religious community. They live in the world. They belong. We have a number of religious, if you look them online, you'll see a number of secular institute that you can join if you're a secular institute, but you become consecrated and it's for life. And 829 is they share in the church's task of evangelizing the world from within the world. They often have a pin or something that signifies their community. And you would say, well, that's a nice little pin. It's like, oh no, it's more than a nice. This is what I gave my life to. All right. Their order is into the temporal things. They're ordered to the temporal things of the world, just like all lay people. That's why they're secular institutes. They're not religious institutes like Dominicans. They're secular. You don't. And if you look online, you'll see all the names of them. All right. And they embrace the evangelical councils according to their constitutions because they have constitutions they live by. Now it's even easier with them because they all get on a Zoom and they all talk to the community on Zoom like once. Before they had to travel, they'd have a retreat once a year. So if you belong to the Mater Dei Institute, Secular Institute, once a year they'd have a retreat, maybe in Washington, D.C., and then they bring us in, and then they used to write letters to each other, and now then they call, and they form a community that way. But they live in, they have a job, they take care of their own finances, they don't, that kind of thing. And then and the societies of apostolic life, some of those, so that you could see that there's a wide variety of religious life in the church, and or consecrated life. Society, some of you know them. One of the more famous ones is Regnum Christi. That's a society of apostolic life. There are consecrated people in there, right? They're lay people in the world. They work in the world, they have a job, but yet they have a whole formation program under the Society of Apostolic Life. You can see that that's at number 930. The point in this is the Catechism is telling you that many, many, many different callings. Most people, you're a nun, you could be a nun. But even when you're a nun, you could be a nun or a sister. A nun technically is one who goes in, is like a monk. A sister is like a brother. And so that's why there's tons of stuff out there for people who think that they are called. And you don't have, and for consecrated though, almost all, for all of these, they are all unmarried state. Right? There are some communities that have always tried to do it married, but you end up belonging to associations as married because your primary responsibility is your marriage and family, where these would not be their marriage and family, it would be their apostolate that they're called to. So that's why it's like when people come in, they're like, I want to get holy. I'm like, the only way you're going to get holy is go back to your husband, because that's where you're going to find holiness. That's where that's where you're supposed to be. And if I were to take you away from that, I'd be taking away from you from your primary covenant and that you belong to. All right? How's that for a lot of words, huh? But that's the whole section on the church. Then we will go to next week on the communion of saints, and then the Blessed Mother. And then we will be done the church. And then we'll talk about forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and life everlasting, eternal life. And then you will have had with me, for those who came over, the entire section of the dogma of the church. All right? Which I'm sure you got down pat. Because I don't. Every time I'm looking, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot all about that. We believe that? Should we do a glory be? Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Thanks a lot, guys. God bless you. I'm surprised you put up with me half the time,
Well, that's because we're up there.
This is right.